There once was a man who had 2 sons. The younger said to his father,
"Father, I want right now what is coming to me."
So the father divided the property between them. It wasn't long before the younger son packed his bags and left for a distant country. There, undisciplined and dissipated, he wasted everything he had. After he had gone through all his money, there was a bad famine all through that country, and he began to hurt. He signed on with a citizen there who assigned him to the fields to slop the pigs. He was so hungry he could have eaten the corn cobs in the pig slop, but no one would give him any. That brought him to his senses, and he said,
"All those farm hands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am starving to death. I'm going back to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against God. I have sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son. Take me on as a hired hand.'"
He got up and went home to his father. When he was still a far way off, his father saw him. His heart pounding, he ran out, embraced and kissed him. The son started his speech.
"Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again."
But the father wasn't listening. He was calling the servants.
"Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then get a grain-fed heifer and roast it. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found."
And they began to have a wonderful time. All this time, his older son had been out in the field. When the day's work was done, he came in. As he approached the house, he could hear the music and the dancing. Calling over one of the house servants, he asked, "What's going on?" He told him, "Your brother came home. Your father has ordered a feast, barbecue beef, because he has come home safe and sound." The older brother stalked off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. His father came out and tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. The son said,
"Look how many years I've stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief. But have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends? Then this son of yours, who has thrown away all your money on prostitutes, shows up, and you go all out with a feast."
His father said,
"Son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found." I know both of those kids, the younger son and the older brother. In the late 1960s, my husband and I learned that we would not be able to have our own children. Shortly thereafter, Jeff attended a district meeting of the United Methodist Men. The program was presented by someone from the Indiana United Methodist Children's Home. They shared about their foster adoption program. Jeff came home from that meeting and asked if I would be interested in a foster care situation that could lead to adoption. I immediately said yes. We contacted the home, a caseworker came for a visit, we were approved, and in a very short time, we were foster parents to a 10-year-old boy. A year later, we adopted him. Bobby lived with us for 5 years before running away. He was only 15, and for the next 40 years he lived the life of the proverbial prodigal son. I don't know all he's done, what he's been through, and I don't want or need to know. Off and on we would hear from him, but I really didn't think there was anything left of the relationship. During those years, he and his ex-wife had 4 children, all of whom were taken from them by the courts for neglect. Fortunately, they were all placed in loving, caring homes, and 3 of them were adopted. 5 years ago, while living in Fort Myers, Florida, he walked in front of an SUV and was nearly killed. Miraculously, he survived. His birth sister called to tell me what had happened. I began a telephone relationship with his oldest daughter, Jenny, and his girlfriend, Jan, whom he later married. It was a couple of months before he left the hospital and once he was released, I went down to Fort Myers to visit. We began to reconnect. As miraculous as his survival was, even more so to me were his words that he owned every decision he ever made, and he blamed no one but himself for the life he had lived. He's now 57. He and Jan recently moved to Shelbyville, and I'm now learning how to rebuild a relationship that I thought was no longer there. As it turns out, he never stopped thinking of me as his mother, but I have to confess that at the time I did not know what to think about him. His 3 daughters and 1 son all have children of their own. Because of the direction that Bob's adult life took for so many years, I didn't know any of them until recently. 5 years ago, when I met his oldest daughter, Jenny. 2 years ago, I met his daughter, Nikki, and then his son, Rob. Because one lives in Florida and the other's in Ohio, it's not easy to get together. But I have made the effort to be in touch with them. I've had minimal contact with their children, but I claim them as grandchildren too, and I'm working on getting to know them as well. There is still one daughter he has yet to reunite with, and I have yet to meet. A year after Bobby came, Ronnie came. He was 12 at the time. As with Bobby, we adopted him a year later. He was 8 months older than Bobby. They knew each other from the home, but they weren't close friends at that time. He lived with us until graduation from high school, and then after a short time in school, he married and had a son, J.R. J.R. married Angela, his high school sweetheart, and they had twin daughters, Alyssa and Brianne. In 2013, we lost J.R. after a 12-year battle with colon cancer. Ron was a troubled young man most of his adult life, and although our relationship was frequently more off than on, it did finally develop into a loving mother-son relationship, for which I am most grateful. There is one difference between my story and the story of the lost son. Ron and Bob were reunited as brothers in 2013, and the older brother was thrilled. In the spring of 2014, Susan Bennett from the Children's Home in Lebanon contacted me and asked if I would be willing to be interviewed as the parent of one of their adopted children. They were going to prepare a video for the 100th anniversary celebration in 2015. I agreed, and when I told Ron, he was so excited he asked if he also could be part of that. Ron had fond memories of his time at the home. Susan was delighted. We were the only former resident adoptive parent combo in the video. In June of that year, Ron and I went to Lebanon and recorded the video together. In the fall of that same year, while Bob and Jan were visiting from Florida, Ron came up from Kentucky. He wanted to take Bob back to Lebanon to see all the changes. Well, Bob's memories weren't as fond as Ron's, and he didn't want to go. But for Ron's sake, he did. And Susan sensed right away that Bob didn't want to be there, but she's very gifted at reaching beyond the barriers that kids put up, even adult kids. We took the tour, and Bob began to see all the changes. There were no more dormitories. Now there are family homes built for residents and 2 parents. Each resident has his or her own room. There is an on-campus school for those whose behavior prevent them from attending public schools. Susan shared that some former residents had even come back to serve as mentors, and by the time we left, Bob was ready to come back and be a mentor. It was in December of 2014, following that visit to Lebanon, that Ron was killed in an auto accident. He was 55. Although life often takes us places we don't want to go, there are pluses. I had a wonderful relationship with a loving son. We had J.R. for 34 years. He was a wonderful young man, a loving husband, and a devoted father. And I now have a granddaughter and 2 great-granddaughters, whom I dearly love. In August of 2015, Bob and his wife and I attended the 100th anniversary celebration. Although Ron didn't get to see the video, We like to think he was there with us at the time. Up until that time, I only knew Bob and Ron's stories, but as I watched the video, we heard stories from other residents. Their stories were just as heartbreaking, just as moving as ours. They were all children who, for one reason or another, were not able or unwanted to live at home. What the home did for them and continues to do is amazing. The home is more than just a place to live. It's an environment where they are loved and valued. They are given a strong moral foundation, an introduction to faith in the God who created and loves them, and they are encouraged to develop leadership skills and good coping mechanisms for life. In the best of circumstances, family is not always easy. For us, becoming family had many challenges. Both boys came with a lot of emotional baggage. Bobby was born with fetal alcohol syndrome, a diagnosis not readily identified back in the 60s and 70s. In children born with fetal alcohol syndrome, the frontal lobe is underdeveloped, affecting the ability to connect actions, behavior with consequences. His mother was an alcoholic and a street prostitute who sold 2 of her children on the black market. Bobby was taken from her by the police when he was 4, after which he was placed in a number of foster homes, before being placed with the Children's Home in Lebanon. When I learned all of that, I was really angry with his mother. Then I learned that she was raised by her grandmother, who didn't want her, but her birth mother had died giving her birth, and she had no alternative. My heart softened when I learned that. Although it didn't change anything, it did explain a lot. It was important for Bob to find his birth family. Some 20 years ago, he found his birth mother and established a relationship with one of his birth sisters, connecting with the other sister shortly after his accident. He has a good relationship with both of them. Not only have I met both of his sisters, and Nikki and Rob and their adoptive parents, I have hosted all of them at family reunions in my home on 2 different occasions. Ronnie's story was a bit different. Apparently his parents were arrested for child neglect and actually incarcerated here in Marion County. Unfortunately, they were given conjugal visits, resulting in more siblings, and returned to jail on more than one occasion. I was told there were other siblings, but Ron wasn't aware of them. He was placed in a foster home with the intention of adoption, but as so many of these children do, he acted out to the extent that the foster parents decided they couldn't handle him. I learned from him later in life how devastating that rejection was for him. Like Bobby, he was in a number of different foster homes before being placed in Lebanon. Unlike Bobby, he never seemed to have any desire to find or connect with any of his birth family. The Bible says the sins of the father and mothers are visited unto the 3rd and 4th generation. I believe that. I don't think it's meant to be punishment, but rather it's simply the result of consequences to behaviors. This year, the Sunday after Easter, Ange, Alyssa, and Brianne came from Bloomington and spent the afternoon with me. We had dinner, and then Ange and I sat outside on the deck, soaking up the warm sunshine while the girls did cartwheels in the lawn. As I reflected on that afternoon, it became clear to me, it became apparent that blood isn't the only thing that constitutes family. My connection with Ange happened because she married J.R., the son of my adopted son, Ron. There is no blood connection. However, there is a connection of spirit that we honor as family. Even though both Ron and J.R. are gone, I know they would be pleased that we've maintained that family connection. I came from what I call a storybook family, so all of this was new to me, and I've often said if I knew then what I know now, I'd still be running. I hope that's not the case, for any other path would not have led to the people whose lives I've shared and touched, and whose lives I have been touched by. I have been, and I am now, both blessed and grateful we could and do call ourselves family. Thank you.